Okay, this will be Plants as Ornamentals, which is also labeled as Plants as Beauty. As you can see, this is coming from chapter 17 in the textbook. It is not necessary that you read the in-depth that we have in the chapter. Just letting you know that that's going along. So if you want more information, it's in chapter 17 in the textbook. My dog is wandering around in the background, so you're probably going to hear her pacing around and her collar jingling. Hopefully she stays quiet. So ornamental plants. Why do we plant them? We They don't provide us any food, but we enjoy planting them. They're beautiful. Sometimes it's definitely an exercise to garden. So we can do it for our health. We do it for fragrance. Mostly, we just enjoy looking at them, so it's for fun. So if you take a look at these pictures, people would mostly classify these as beautiful. And then if you look at the bottom one, think of all the ceremonies and things that we do with plants, particularly the cut flower industry, which is actually a very large industry. Sometimes people will find one group of plants more appealing than others. Succulents right now tend to be the thing at the moment. So people are collecting succulents. Some people get into orchids or ferns or cacti. There's lots of benefits. I'm sure you can come up with many things on your own of having different hobby plants, house plants, or taking care of any type of plants. You can learn about them. You can propagate them. You can observe them. There's lots of things that you can do when you're growing plants for fun. Sometimes though, there's lead to over collecting. So the top link, the title link, that takes you to this place about Cypripedium, which is a pink lady slipper, which you can see posted here in the picture. And I'm not expecting you to read this whole thing, but pink lady slippers are native to North America, and they are definitely not a common plant. They're not quite on the conservation status or anything, but they're definitely something that people steal from the wild when they see them because they're kind of rare. They're difficult to grow in gardens, which is another problem with them. It does lead to over collecting. So this here happens to be, as you can see, Echinacea tennesseeensis. So you can see the little picture there of a little coneflower. And I'm going to scroll down here to noteworthy characteristics. It is one of our natives. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you. You can read it. It is a little coneflower. The problem is it only grows in a very small area. So it is on the federally endangered list because of that. The challenge that we have, of course, is it grows well in gardens. So they are now making cultivars. They're not collecting from the wild. They're breeding plants that now have been created through traditional breeding. So the plant is pretty much living now mostly in gardens as cultivars. I took this picture at the Smithsonian Gardens. This is plants that were poached from around the world and tried to be smuggled back into the country, and they happened to be caught when the people were smuggling them back in the country. So this is a house of nothing but cacti and succulents that were collected from around the world. And this is the same thing for orchids. People were poaching these plants. We have legal agreements with the countries that we are required to maintain these plants until the country of origin asks for them back. But most of these countries are third world countries, so they don't have the money to ask for them back. But we're legally required to care for them. So we have all these greenhouses with all these poached plants. We can learn a lot from growing. We can learn just simply by observing the plants. We can learn all kinds of different things. You can probably add 100 different things to this list that you can learn from watching plants and caring for plants. Sometimes our hobbies tend to get a little out of hand. We build greenhouses, hobby greenhouses for longer growing seasons to grow plants outside of our regions. If your area is very sunny, you might build a shade house to reduce the amount of light so you can grow plants that are more shade oriented in areas that they wouldn't normally grow. We do use cold frames all the time, particularly for our winter food crops, and that increases the temperature in there. Here's raised beds, increasing the drainage, again, so maybe you can grow plants that you wouldn't normally grow. Here's a cold frame. A lot of our garden centers use cold frames to overwinter plants that may not be able to overwinter, or particularly if they've got limited space in their greenhouses. If you really want to take it far, here's a growth chamber. And some people will do this for setting up seeds. They simply put extra lights on some shelves so they can start their seeds earlier indoors. But if you want to go for it, here's a growth chamber, which is an entirely, it looks kind of like a refrigerator, except that everything is controlled. Artificial lighting, artificial heating, artificial temperature controls, humidity controls. Usually they're used for experiments and not often for home gardens. A former student actually sent me these pictures, and this is his home setup for him trying to make sure that his plants get what they want before they can go back outside in the summertime. So yes, we garden geeks do a lot of things for our plants. We can learn about different propagation methods, stem cuttings, root cuttings. We can try different things. We can do grafting. Now, most homeowners are not going to do grafting. That's generally reserved for the nursery industry, where they take the rootstock of one plant and they stick a stem of another plant very closely related on top of it. So it's usually reserved for woody plants and for things that are hard to propagate. So here's an example of grafting. You can see the two different barks. Now this is an example of grafting gone wrong, where the rootstock is growing faster than the stem, but it gives you a good example of putting two closely related plants together, and then the roots provide the water and nutrients for the top, and the top provides the photosynthate for the roots. But in this case, it's gone wrong. Here's another one where it's gone wrong, and the bottom part is actually disintegrating. So this plant is not long for the world. Here's something else that can go wrong with grafting. You often see suckers coming out at the base of a plant, and that becomes a maintenance issue. So if you look over here on the left, you've got all these suckers coming out, and that's the rootstock of the base trying to grow and break bud around the base of the plant. Over here on the right, if you'll notice that most of this plant is a weeping plant, and yet you've got this one branch that's sticking straight up in the air. And that is going to be where the graft happened. A bud broke from the rootstock and just started growing, and it wasn't pruned off. So you do get some weird things occasionally that happens with grafting. This is a Photoshop image of somebody who put together a flowering plant, as you can see, of lots and lots of different very closely related plants onto one trunk. You can find this image online. I just downloaded this online. There's lots and lots of pictures just like this. Here is the actual plant. And so you've got several different crab apples and pears and peaches and plums and cherries, which are all very closely related, all grafted onto one trunk, giving all these different colored flowers. Lots of people grow their own plants from seed. You do have to know the dormancy requirements, so that could be a challenge. Some seeds can take up to 2 or even 3 years to germinate, so that can be a challenge for people. But it also is a very cheap way to grow and acquire plants if you can provide the requirements for growing things from seed. There's always these arguments for lawns and landscapes. Why do we have a lawn? Why do we have something that we have to mow all the time? Well, there's lots of pros and cons with that. I'm sure you can come up with things on your own that are pros and cons. People do have concerns about when we care for our lawns, when we put a lot of chemicals on our lawns. I put this sentence here on the cool season grasses versus warm season grasses so that you can be aware that there are such a things as grasses that do well in the north that don't do well in the south, and grasses that do well in the south that don't do well in the north. In fact, if you've ever been to Florida and tried to walk on their lawns, they do not have what I would call barefoot grass. Go ahead and look that stuff up. Google Florida lawns, and you'll see. So, we need lawns. We need them for sports fields. We need them for golf courses. They look nice when it's well maintained, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of energy to care for a lawn in this sort of shape. So here's a thing that says, the lawn is a lie. In other words, I'm just kind of quickly scroll down here, right? Here's a riddle. Considered for acre, what is the most pesticide, herbicide, water, labor, cash intensive crop? Your lawn. So obviously this is a website that says, the lawn is bad. But if you look at it from the other side, the lawn actually can be beneficial. All right? You can, this article, if you want to go in and sign up and send your email in, which I don't really want to do, will tell you that the lawn sequesters carbon. The lawn is photosynthesis. The lawn is cooler than your driveway if you're concrete. So there's lots of benefits to having a lawn as well. What if you replace the lawn with another type of ground cover? Is that good or is that bad? That might work in some situations. It might not work in other situations. The nice thing about a lawn is we do have broadleaf weed killers. If you have a dandelion that pops up in your lawn and you really don't like dandelions, there is a spray for the broadleaf plant that won't kill the lawn. We don't have that with other ground covers. But it might work in small situations. So all of these are situations, well, the first two are situations where up here you've got a ground cover that's replacing the lawn. Now you've reduced the maintenance in an area where people are doing a lot of walking. Maybe the maintenance is a little challenging to do. If you look at this one over here in the top right, you've got lots and lots of different ground covers where the lawn might not be appropriate. It's a very small area, hard to get a mower in. But if you look at this bottom one, you have to have lawn there. How do you have a golf course without a lawn? So the lawn can be appropriate. The lawn might not be appropriate for every situation. Right? We have what we call bedding plants, usually annuals, petunias, begonias, geraniums, things like that. I've talked a lot. Well, I talked earlier about purple coneflower, Tennessee coneflower. There's a huge industry in these ornamental plants. There's garden centers. There's all kinds of different cultivars. They're good for pollinators. They're nice to look at. Some of them smell nice. We have a cut flower industry. So there's lots and lots of reasons to keep this industry going, including our trees and shrubs. Right? We can control the weather a little bit. We can reduce heating and cooling costs with the appropriate placement of trees and shrubs around our buildings. Trees and shrubs can provide not just shade, but flowering, nice fall color, fruit. So there's lots and lots of things that they can do. We can specialty prune them. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, it's bonsai. That's a very specialty pruning. We can deal with native plants. On the left-hand side is a native holly tree. And in the bottom right-hand corner is a dogwood grown for its flowering. We can grow them for their fruit. So if you look in the upper right, those are pecans. If you look in the lower left, that is a shagbark hickory. And in the center there is actually a retention pond designed to gather all the water, full of native plants, designed to gather all the water that hits a commercial property so it doesn't run into the sewer system. So that's an example of a very specialty type of garden. We've talked a little bit about xeriscape. They tend to look in the Arizona and the southwest portion of the United States like something you've never been to. I shot both of these pictures at Huntington Gardens in California. It really does look like you've landed on another planet. But we can do that here, not necessarily with cactus, but with native plants. Right? So these are more typical what you might find in the Midwest, the prairie. We do have a few cacti that survive here. Not as big as the one that's shown there, but prairie style grasses, prairie plants that are very adapted to not having a whole lot of water. And if you really get into plants, you can have all kinds of specialty gardens. You can do ponds and streams and containers and all kinds of different things. Here's a wonderful lush backyard. You talk about diversity, this garden has a lot of diversity in it. You talk about insects, this garden has a lot of insects and pollinators and frogs and all kinds of things that we would think of in a more wild garden, and yet it's obviously a much more contained area. We can attract butterflies and hummingbirds. People plant for these things all the time. You have both the good and the bad when you've got butterflies. You have to have places for their caterpillars as well, and caterpillars are notorious munchers. So lots and lots of things we can do with our ornamental plants. Houseplants, we grow lots of houseplants. Houses are very difficult. We don't like high humidity. Plants love high humidity for the most part. Our houses are very low light, even if you turn all the lights on. It's very low light relative to outside. So it's a difficult environment for plants, but they're still very, very popular. You can grow lots of flowering things, whether they're short-lived or whether they're long-lived. We do a lot of things indoors with our plants for the sole purpose of looking at them and caring for them. That's it. All right, guys, if you got any questions on this, don't hesitate to get in touch. Bye-bye.